Thank you, everybody, for joining our RV.NUG meetup tonight. We are very excited to have you here with us. We continue to have our online meetup monthly, except once every quarter, we have an in-person meeting. And our very first in-person meeting will be next month. So hope to have all of you who can make it come out and see us. I'm looking very forward to seeing some of you face-to-face. It's going to be at Medico, right outside of Salem. You would arrive towards the side of Salem that you're coming from, and you would go through the employee entrance, and we'll have some signs posted there as well. So really excited about having our first in-person meeting since the beginning of the pandemic. So we've been looking forward to coming back together for a long time. And want to thank the officers for figuring out all the details to make that actually happen. I know it's not easy even after this long after the pandemic. So thank you very much. Special thanks to Ron and Alex. Okay, but even when we're not having in-person meetings, we have fantastic presentations we bring to you guys every single month. And this month is absolutely not an exception. You have a fantastic presentation lined up for you by Nick Daniel on Remix, Embrace the Web. Nick is motivated by software's potential to improve end customers' lives. He is always looking for ways to innovate and improve user experiences, and is a founding partner of small RVA-based consulting firm, NASH.US. I'm sorry, it's n-.us, Nick? Okay, thank you. n-.us, that's ENDASH.US. Now, he says he is always looking for ways to make the company look bad by making mistakes while live coding during talks and presentations. So, well, we are going to be praying for the demo gods for everything to go perfect tonight, Nick. Thank you very much for joining. Take it away.
Thank you. Yep. Yes, hopefully we don't need to pray too much, and we are all okay with a few hiccups here and there, because that's code, and that's what I like to show and go through. So thank you all for having me, and thank you for coming. Meetups in the development community is nothing without developers who are interested in learning, and sharing what they've learned and all of that. So thanks for coming and being a part of the development community. Before we kick off, let's do a quick poll. Little "Why are you here?" poll. So here's a QR code, and we've got a link down here. We have our Pebble poll, where Pebble, my little dachshund/beagle sort of wiener dog mix, asks us questions. Do you want to learn about Remix? Are you here to learn about any technology, or you just like to watch people try to live code and fail, or are you just looking for some anti-JavaScript Twitter beefs? Yes, all of the above. Yes, of course. So go ahead and run over that link and fill out the poll there. We're going to be building this app today, so go ahead and check it out. While you're doing that, QR code and link are still here. Who I am and why I'm here. So I'm Nick. I'm going to look over here because that's where the video is sometimes, but this is where my camera is, so cool. I'm Nick. I am living in Richmond, Virginia with my family. I've got a wife, a new kid, new son, 5 months old, and our 2 dogs, and brought my brother and some other family in the area as well. 6 years ago now, my brother and I started up N-Dash Consulting, a software and accessible design firm, small still, so under 10 on staff, but we focus on product thinking, accessible design, and software development. So I am a technical coach, technical from software craft to tech with Agile, and senior front-end developer, full stack developer, whatever words you want to use. I like coding, and I like being in the front end. So why am I doing a presentation like this for a meetup? Well, everybody loves a little bit of adrenaline, so live coding is kind of fun. So we'll see how that goes. And really, I like sharing the story of the developer experience bliss that I've found with Remix. There are some tools now that have some similar patterns. We'll touch on that in Next.js, but nothing quite the same as Remix. And when I stumbled across it a year ago, or a year and a half ago maybe, it changed the way I view developer experiences. So TLDR, I'm Nick. Remix is awesome. All right, cool. So let's jump right in. We'll check on the poll results in a little bit. If anybody needs that URL, you can just holler, and I'll just do it right now, I guess. Remix poll.image.us. So if you need it, it's in the chat. Cool. So let's jump in and talk about some of the backbones here of Remix, what it is and really what it isn't is a good place to start, I think. So it's not some small JavaScript library to plug into an existing site, which might be a tool that some .NET developers are looking for. Sorry, hate to break it to you, not Remix. So something like that, Alpine or Lit Element will work well. It's not a database provider or an app development platform. I'll be touching on Firebase during this, but it is not anything like that. And it's not another way to convolute CSS or, put styling in your markup like Tailwind or something. Everybody has preferences. My preference is use CSS. None of those things. What it is a compiler. It is a server-side HTTP handler, server framework, and a browser framework. It's often described as a compiler for React Router. So a lot of the docs that Remix has are actually just React Router docs. So if you've ever built a React app and you've done any browser routing, you probably are using React Router. So you're probably familiar with some of the principles that you'll find in Remix. And the difference between React Router and Remix is that Remix is targeted around the dynamic nature of both front and back ends for web projects. So it's not going to be your back end architecture choice if you're just providing an API, but you'll hear about BFFs, the back end for front end, that concept. Remix is sort of all encompassing of that. It is your front end and back end integrated, and we'll see just how integrated in just a little bit. Some other notes. It's got some really good docs, and the community is strong and growing. So new examples and blog posts and tutorials and actually versions of their docs every day, every week, and a lot of new features. So hot module reloading, HMR was just released, last week. So constantly getting good new developer experience updates, as well as building off of all the great stuff that you see in the web as a platform. So it's similar to Next and Nuxt. Like I said, there's some different trade-offs. I don't want to dive into it. I'm not an expert on Next or Nuxt or really even Remix per se. So I have some expert articles to refer to for questions like that. Additionally, you'll get a lot of starting templates to choose from. Like I said, the community is growing, and with that are these stacks or genres what they call them. And those are basically starting places that include certain tooling that you might like or deployment platforms that you might prefer. Cool. Their philosophy is why I ended up investing, that second or that third project, that additional time. Some other platforms, you have to learn a lot of sort of vendor-specific, third-party, proprietary. You have to learn very framework-specific syntaxes and packages and all of that. Remix's philosophy is really to work with and not against the foundations of the web. That as a core philosophy is what got me sort of hooked to check it out even more and keep building on it. So a lot of the docs that it links to are React Router, yes, but more of them are MDN.io, straight up MDN docs. So you're talking about fetch. You're not talking about some abstraction on top of fetch. You're talking about forms. You're not talking about some specific Angular form library. Talking about HTML, good old fashioned, the one we've loved for 30 years, form with inputs. So those sorts of things are different than a lot of other platforms or frameworks out there. And it's something that I think is why it's worth giving Remix a second look, because I think that's what gives it more staying power than some of the other platforms out there. In this same vein, it is very much a proponent of progressive enhancement. So when you build something at first, it should be using the basic, totally universal, all-inclusive, accessible web platforms like form. So you don't need to have JavaScript enabled to use a form. If you're using a special Angular-specific, React-specific, Vue-specific form library, or you rolled your own, when you have JavaScript handling on your form like that, generally you need to have JavaScript enabled in the application. So Remix has a lot of these things that give you a really strong, fully accessible application straight out the gate. with the ability to progressively enhance with features on top of where you have browsers that have client-side JavaScript enabled. But the world still exists where people might have that disabled, and that's okay, so long as we're using those core web platform technologies. All right, that was a lot of words. Any questions or comments before we jump into the part where we code?
I'm still intrigued and haven't been able to wrap my mind around exactly what it is.
Cool. So that means we jump right in. All right. So let's build that Pebbles poll app. We'll start out. We'll do a new project. And while I'm actually, we'll go ahead and do that right now. So let's create a new project using Create Remix. I would like to call it March Meetup. No, Pebble poll. That makes more sense. I don't know, whatever. What type of app do you want to create? Just the basics or a pre-configured stack ready for production? If I click this, I can choose between these stacks, and I can look into Remix run stacks and find out what things come with here with these. Some of them have different like SQL. One of them will have a SQLite database that comes with it, Prisma hookup for ORM, like all of that. So you can do some cool stuff. I don't want to do any of that yet because I want to focus on really the core basics. So I'm going to do just the basics. Where do you want to deploy? Choose Remix App Server. If you're unsure, it's easy to change deployment targets. So as you can see, there's a lot of things already that give you some plug-in to very common deployment and hosting patterns. I have hosted using Remix App Server and Dockerizing and running on Google Cloud Run, so just any Docker platform, but I've also hosted on Netlify. That's what the Pebble Poll app is hosted on, and Fly.io. So a lot of choices. It's pretty easy to get started, and once you pick them, it will populate in the README during this config here what the deployment instructions are. Yeah, let's run npm install. Let's do all this and come back over here while that install is running. So we just initialized the project. We're going to review the file structure and talk about some of the basics of what was created. We'll start adding some routes and child routes, talk about styling, why the paradigm in Remix and styling is important to take note of. It is very cool. as a front-end developer who loves CSS clashes and conflicts are very familiar. And Remix does a good job of making those clashes and conflicts more predictable by proactively removing styling from the document so that your browser doesn't have stale styling happening, which if you've built a React app and you've tried importing CSS in a component, you will see that CSS never leaves. Remix, you can structure things very easily so that irrelevant styles are not processed, not loaded in the document at all. We're going to hook up to Firebase and actually load some data. So we'll show what loaders and actions are. These are the two sort of two very large components of Remix, and they also are similar to React Router version 6 and above. It's basically, it is the same thing where you have loaders per routes and actions per routes, and then we'll add the actual voting in here. So did anybody vote on this? What do we think? Yeah, Twitter beefs. Cool. Okay, so we got some votes. Sweet. Any tech. Cool. All right. Good to know. Oh, I'm the only one who wants Twitter beefs. Good. Good for everybody. All right. We're done installing over here. No vulnerabilities. That's it. CD and check the README for dev and deploy instructions. Hide. When you have Stage Manager turned on, yes, they were last decade, you have to turn off Stage Manager, manually hide that hide thing, and then turn Stage Manager back on. Cool. Stage Manager is new with the newest Mac OS. It's pretty cool. I don't know how many of y'all are doing Mac versus Windows development, but new feature, pretty fun. All right, so that's it. Check it out for instructions. So let's go into that Pebble poll directory here and open it up. And we see, cool. Zoom in. Is that good? Do I want to go one more click in? How do we feel about reading the text at the Zoom level on a screen share? I got one thumbs up.
It's quite big.
All right, cool. Yeah, well, it's better than, all right, cool. We got it. Readability, it's important. Sweet. Thank you for the feedback. All right, so first thing I like to look at is not actually the README, it's the package JSON. I think that's very telling with a JavaScript application or TypeScript application as to what the heck it does. So we'll see that right away we have a couple of scripts that are pretty familiar on different applications and frameworks. We have a dev script for doing local development. We have a build script to package up our artifacts, our deployment artifacts. We have start if we want to leverage the Remix server package that it provides for us. I chose TypeScript for this. I generally do JavaScript development, so if I make syntax errors, I'm sorry. We're all learning together. And then outside of that, you look at the dependencies we've got. Remix, it bakes in React and React DOM, and that's really it. We have ESLint and some types that we're importing in our dev tooling, but not a whole lot of stuff coming wrapped in here. So when we look at some of the patterns, they're Remix specific, or they're web specific, but there's not any additional real packages that we have to be worried about. So no like UI component libraries or any of that stuff. The next thing is the README. You can see in the deployment, build your app, start it if you want. And if you want to, you can go ahead and rebuild. You can go back into the create remix and pick a different deployment provider. But I've manually transitioned from the Remix server to Netlify to Express for Dockerization, and all that's been fine. It's pretty easy to move things around. Cool. All right, the code. Remix dev, Remix app server started. Cool. Welcome to Remix. Here it is. All right. Good stuff. Yeah, nice and easy. Let's get going. Welcome to Remix. Where is that loading from? So all of our application code is in our app folder. This is a similar structure to a lot of other frameworks, so nothing crazy there. We have two entry points, one on the client side, one on the server side. I'm not going to go into this too much, but we have server-side hydration and client-side hydration. Server-side rendering baked in with our front-end rendering. These are the two entry points that actually, if you look at all this stuff, you don't really ever have to change. And it is what is giving you a lot of that hydration in the front end, or a lot of the pre-build of your components. You don't really touch this though again, and then your front end is similar where you have in React. In a React app, you're going to be mounting on your root component. This is similar. It's hydrating what your server-side rendering has already done. Again, they do this. We're not going to touch on these two files anymore. You can dive in deeper because what matters more is the distinction between server and client within each file. So we'll start at the root route, or the root route, and then look at the routes folder and move from there. So your root route is going to be your primary document that you're returning with an outlet, everything inside of it. And we have some other things in here. Scripts are going to be what is bringing along our JavaScript. We can actually comment this out, and I'm going to, so that we can demonstrate how Remix works without any JavaScript enabled, and we can disable JavaScript on the front end as well. And we'll see that everything still works within Remix, and I'm going to keep it that way as we move forward, just because that is not a common thing when you're talking about JavaScript frameworks being able to run and accept front-end apps with forms and validation and all that good stuff with client-side JavaScript disabled. So head meta links. All right, so a couple things that we start to see that are Remix specific, and I might slip up and say Remix specific when they're actually React Router specific, but it's okay for this context. If you are aware enough of that distinction, please call me out and correct the group. If not, it doesn't really matter because there's a lot of overlap between Remix and React Router, but I digress. One of the first things we start to see is a magical little function, export const meta. So a meta function is a named attribute of any route in Remix. So Remix routes have actions, loaders, meta, links. Our meta function is setting charset, title, viewport. Well, that's cool. That means I can change my new Remix app to, let's say, Pebbles poll, save it, come back here, and here's Pebbles poll in the title instead. Great. What I mean by any route can have this is I can create a new file in here called polls.tsx, which is, okay, it looks like that's the context. Call it polls route, and this returns something that's like polls. And this is cool because I can link to it from my main route, and I'll say, okay, let's go ahead and link to, so I'm going to use remix run link. And this just turns into an anchor. What it gives us above using an anchor is relative routing. So I will say, I want this to go to polls, and I can do like slash polls, I can do dot slash. That's why I would use a link instead of an anchor itself. So go to polls, polls, great. Now, if I want to change the title, so like we talked about that meta function, I just created a new route called polls. It has an H1, polls route. I linked to it. But if I want this route to have a separate title, I would say, and I'm a big advocate of copying and pasting. I would say I really only want to overwrite this pebbles poll and say polls and put a pipe in here or something. And you can see, okay, polls, pipe, pebbles, poll. Very, very easily, you can see how you could put in a helper function that appends, instead of overwriting the title, you maybe have a function in here that says, okay, give me this and append it with whatever the site title is. Sure, we could do that. But what we just did there, and I've already gone off script, so you know what we'll get to the destination. We might hit a few different landmarks on the way. But what we've done thus far is we showed it's really easy to spin up a new app. It's really easy to construct a new route and render JSX in a route. And then additionally change a component that you're used to changing when it comes to web apps, and that's the title. The next thing that you might be used to changing is the styling, right? So we're used to having different CSS on some places than other places. So a common use case would be if this were hosted on, you have a sort of sub application like our Pebble or our remix polls.n-.us had more than just Pebbles poll, but a bunch of different polls. And we wanted the whole styling scheme for each of those main top level folders, top level routes to be different. Well, when I mentioned about style bleed and style conflicts, this is why it's relatively easy to have predictable style conflicts. So I can, just like how I have a meta, I can say I also want a links function. And a links function is similar to a meta function, except you're going to return an array of items instead of a map of items. An array of items that we are going to do is stuff that we've seen before. So let's do a style sheet link. And the actual link for that will say polls style sheet URL. And that's that. And poll style sheet URL needs to be something that exists. So let's go ahead and make it. Let's make a new file, style/polls .css or something. And I'm going to import that and say import polls style sheet, which is not going to autocomplete because it's erroneous right now, from tilde/style/polls. Okay, so we made a new CSS file, we imported it, and we put it in the links. Now, one of the things that we will that we said we wanted to look different. I'm going to just copy some CSS over here. Say we want two variables, a blue and a purple app color, and setting the font family, and then setting the background color of the body to blue. So if we save this, we come back to here. Okay, everything looks totally different. And if I come back here, nothing looks different. And what we want to look at, and what makes it really nice when compared to a traditional React app where you're trying to import styles, is that we're actually looking at the head here, and we can see when we're on the polls route, we have a link style sheet href build asset polls. So it auto does. I don't have Webpack installed or anything like that. Remix is handling putting this into the appropriate assets folder and all of that, and linking, because we're using this links function and we're not manually trying to hard code it in the head here. We're leveraging some of this core Remix functionality. And so when we go to the other page, there's no style sheets at all being loaded in the head. We come here, there is, and when I go back, it's not about clearing the styles or anything like that. It's just that that route doesn't match my route definition here of polls. And so because of that, it won't include these links at all. That's where you don't ever, if you have an invoice as part of the app and you want to use a class name that's going to conflict with your payments portion of the app, like you don't need scoped class names if you're managing your CSS file swapping at a reasonable top level. Just want to take a pause there because that is hard to do in most JavaScript front-end frameworks, and it is a core piece of Remix that gives us the ability to say these styles only apply on these routes, and they get removed automatically from any route that deviates from that. So back to my script.
Pretty impressive.
It's fun. It saves a lot of headaches. You still need to understand like the implications, but the implications are far easier to understand than seemingly non-deterministic style clashes, because one route is bleeding styles over into another route without any cleanup. And the problem is, in order to get around that in React apps, you need to use styled components. You need to use you need to just change all the way over, and let's use Tailwind because we just give up on style clashes. You can use, web components provide shadow DOM for Vue and Angular apps really easily with styled with scoped styles, but those things provide overhead or come with overhead that you might not need if you're just doing route level style inclusion and exclusion.
I just keep adding more pound importance. Just add
increase your target weight and add a bang important at the end, and I think we're all good.
Nah, this is great.
Cool. All right, so let's that's some basics of the styling. I'm gonna just actually copy in all of the app CSS into this polls CSS, so you don't have to watch me write 100 lines of CSS. But nothing crazy in here, just some flex containers, and that's it really, is flex containers and flex properties being defined. So I'm gonna save this and let's start building some functionality. So we have our go to polls link and we have our polls homepage. So let's go ahead and bring this in. All right. So our polls, we want to have some sort of a heading and a list of the polls. So I'm going to bring in a heading because here's our header. SVG Pebble doesn't exist. Link isn't imported yet. SVG Pebble will about to exist once I bring her over. And say, let's make a new file called components. You can structure your file structure and your component structure similar, in whatever preference you have with with what makes sense to your routing and how the components want to have. Generally, what I'll do is inside the routes folder, as we start to build out these larger areas, like if you have like an invoices section, like you generally are going to have some components defined in there. I actually, in the remix config, will add ignored route files. I'll say like, add the components folder so that I can nest folders inside of my routes directory here, and remix isn't going to think that I'm talking about a route when I'm trying to specify a component. But for now, I'm just going to leverage a top level components folder. And again, like other areas, we are seeing this tilde. The tilde refers to the app directory. You can update that, but by default, in Remix, tilde is app directory for everything. So whenever you're importing across, you don't have to do a lot of dot slashes to get up to the top level. That's not really a super special thing about Remix, but it is a nice thing they decided to include. So, okay, I've got Pebbles poll in here. And the next thing that you generally want to have in, or that we want to have, not generally, that we want to have in our polls homepage is some list of all the polls. So that might look something like, I have these polls right here. I'm going to bring in the data and say like const polls data just real quick, and this is what it looks. No, I'm not going to do this. I'm just going to go right to Firebase. So we're going to import data. We're going to connect to the internet. We'll show you the data source, and then I will show you the connection, and we will do it. So these polls are stored in Firebase and in a Cloud Firestore instance. So each of these, favorite color has a title. There's an optional question, why are you here? So let's connect to this. Common use case for web app is connecting to a backend. So let's just jump right into that and then show how we're going to consume that. I'm not going to type out some of those connector functions. I have, what's that? The file here. So I'm going to go into the app directory and create a new file called firebase.server.js and paste in 60 lines of code, where 10 of them are imports. So I am going to be using the Firebase package. So let's install Firebase. And I have some code in here that if you've used Firebase or a similar platform before, generally you are delivering this code to every client browser. And you have authentication and authentication rules set up, and it's not that big of a deal, but everybody feels kind of wishy-washy about it because you're sending an API key over to your clients all the time. And what is fun about this application is that we are not doing that at all. So the .server.js or the .server.ts, that distinction is automatically serving as a both informative tool, but also a restrictive naming convention for Remix to tell us you're not allowed to run any of this code in the browser. So Remix won't allow invocations of code like this from, say, your React front end when it's in a .server.js. So you can have your architectural patterns of connection from your server with in the same code base, in a similar paradigm, without actually delivering that stuff to your client browsers, and still getting all the benefits of having that config near your front end code. So what I mean by that is this code here is going to initialize an application. So this is just connecting to Firebase based on this information here. It's going to grab the Firestore instance, and this is what's just preventing multiple app initializations. So we're going to get our Firestore instance, our database, and this is all, this returns a Firebase app, or this returns a Firestore instance, which has all this stuff in it that can do whatever. So I'm not doing anything special there. I'm just using this Firebase library. That's the only library we're using in this demo. And what we're using with it is like collection and get docs, doc, get doc, update doc. So all of this stuff is basically just the programmatic way to query and modify this data. So when you all clicked on a voting option, we invoke the vote on poll function, which just updates a document by incrementing value by 1. That's Firestore. I only am going to go that deep. The call out here is that we are exporting these functions and we will use them in just a second. So Firebase.server, that's hooked up, get polls is available. The last step is like, okay, how do we do something with that data? How do we get that data into our front end? And the way we do that in a remix world is by leveraging our loader function. So this route, we have a meta function, we have links function, and we're going to turn, okay. So loader function, what is this doing? Let's find out. I'm gonna go ahead and put a console.log that says, ABC from loader data. And say, okay. All right. We'll start running our dev server again. Go back to our localhost 3000. Go to polls. ABC from loader data, 1, 2, 3. Right. I am a little bit confused as to why. Oh, that's right. Of course not. So I was going to show you, hey, look, when you put a console log in your route component, it's going to run on the server and it's going to run on the browser. So as I step through that, does anybody have any ideas as to why I don't see anything logged here, but I do see something logged here? Well, I did disable JavaScript, and I did remove the scripts from being included. So now I add those, ABC from loader data 1, 2, 3, showing up here. Now the question is, why is it showing up in both here and here? That was what I was going to show first, but so this is what I was talking about with the server-side rendering or server-side generation and the client-side hydration. This code does run once first on the server and provides everything needed to the front end, where it then goes and hydrates it and basically runs it again. It's not quite as simple as that, but when you're doing remix development, sometimes you'll see some things are running on the server and not in the browser when you expect them to. And so it's a little bit of an interesting thing. The other thing to notice is that if I run a console.log on my loader, I'm in the loader. You'll see I do not see that on the front end, but I do see it in the server. So on the server side, it runs our loader function. Then it goes and populates what we need for our route component that it's actually going to render. So let's actually hook up to some real data, yeah. Instead of returning ABC123, let's return get polls. It's not going to autocomplete for me. Come on. All right. Maybe because that one's JavaScript file. Okay. And this is an asynchronous function call. So I should decorate my function with async to indicate that. If I'm doing it this way, I don't need to await it because it's implicit, but just to make it a bit more clear, I'll say await the get polls, and then let's wrap it like this. At that point, our loader data here, I'm just going to go ahead and pull out that immediately and say polls. And so our server, yep, here we go, loader data, here are your polls. And again, on our client side, yep, here are your polls. So, but if we do something real quick and go back into, well, turn this off here so that there's no extensions or anything that are using it. And then come back to our root route and turn off scripts again. So no client-side JavaScript. Oh, well, we're not rendering it, so we won't be able to see that. So let's go ahead and map these, yeah, so that we can see how this works without, we'll say, polls and I'm just going to copy what this stuff says over here. So welcome, pick a poll, and then have a link where I'm going to map all the polls. And say, hey, for every poll, just give me a link that's going to take me to this URL and show the data.title. And I'm going to go ahead and paste in the interface for what a poll is. Poll has an ID and it has some data like a title. So save that, come back here. All right. Okay, so slow down for a second. What we are seeing at this point is we have our index route, we have a polls specific route. This polls specific route has a meta and links function that changed the title and bring in some CSS, but more interestingly has a loader function. The loader function says, hey, this is the data that's needed to load this route. This is our data loader function. Our data loader function is synchronously calling Firebase to get the poll. So we're awaiting this and returning it. Our route component just uses a hook called use loader data, grabs that, and then references it like you would in any React application. You would say, hey, I got this polls, I want to map across it, and I want to get a link for each one. And you'll see each of these links takes me to the ID of the poll, 543, 6TW, 543, 6TW. Okay. What is interesting is that if we look at the network call, and why isn't it showing me anything? What am I doing wrong? Seems like I'm filtering something that I don't mean to be, or I'm zoomed wrong or something. But instead, let me bring the scripts back in because maybe it's as simple as that. I don't know. I feel like what is happening? Why? They're pretty silly. So I'm not sure why I'm not seeing anything in the. But anyway, if I don't have scripts enabled, then you know that this data retrieval is not happening from the client. You know that this data retrieval must be happening before it gets to the client. We do see it happening on the front end or on the back end and not on the front end. We got no console logs. So that right there is one of the key concepts of Remix, is that you have your data loader function that does something in the back end that might have special privileged server specific functionality, like our Firebase.server leverages an API key that's not available for the client's browser. It statically generates, static site rendering, plugs in the data into what you need, and delivers a front end back that doesn't require JavaScript to render it in any way. So regardless of my inability to get the network tab to show anything, okay, well, it's showing it here, so maybe it's something to do with the dev server. But this demonstrates it. So by the time that the document comes back, you can see the network waterfall here. We're not waiting on Firebase at this point. That is baked into the first load, and cloud to cloud is going to be faster than client to cloud. So this almost always increases the first meaningful contentful paint by reducing your network waterfall from having subsequent and synchronous dependencies like, oh, well, we need the document to come back and the JavaScript to come back. Like, we don't even need any of the React JavaScript to render the page that already has RV.NUG poll, meetup topics, RVA.js. Like, all this data comes baked into that first response, as opposed to what you're used to seeing with a JavaScript web app. A single page app is all of that's happening from the client side after it's already gone that one level into the cloud and back to get the first document. So big time savings there. And when you look at like the Remix versus Next.js sort of articles, Ryan Florence, he does a really good job of showing differences in how that affects loads across platforms. And if you go to their website, it's like all that. You saw how fast that was crazy. That's what they talk about for everything, is this nested routing and showing that the data that you need comes back in the initial document load because it's happening on the server side. And then you get your progressively enhanced JavaScript functionality after you already have that first contentful paint, which is a lot of work. But all right, it's been okay.
Let's seems like a very significant load time difference there.
Yeah, and it really adds up when you have, especially like a lot of web apps end up having that waterfall of get data A to get data B to get data C to get data D. If you are thoughtful about your loader and route structure, you can save a ton of time. You can save a ton of time on that first real meaningful load, and you don't have to deal with the other thing to note with like these sorts of comparisons is when they show like these loading states that happen in front ends, you don't need to deal with those in Remix unless you want to, because Remix you're preventing, like, you're just using the web as a platform in the normal way that we're used to, like with if you have a PHP document, like your browser's not delivering a halfway generated document. Like whatever code needs to run in that PHP is going to run, and it's going to delay the time the document gets delivered back to the client. That's what Remix is doing, but in a way that's integrated with web app development platform patterns. Very much web application development patterns, because Remix Router, it's built on Remix Router principles, and Remix Router is the number one router for React Router rather, and that's the number one router for React projects. So similar to the principles that we've all been working with server-side code versus front-end code, very similar to PHP in a lot of the ways here, where you have stuff running on the server that's generating DOM template, but this is leveraging technologies and frameworks that are very familiar with people already, and then other reasons why you might want to use this over PHP, but I won't go into this. So let's take this across the finish line. We have a couple more routes to make. So in Remix, if I want to have like, okay, so I want to have one page that has my list of polls, and I want to have one page that shows the individual poll. So, and I never want to show the list of polls while I'm looking at a single poll. The way we do this is the first thing I'm going to do is create like okay, here's my poll ID.tsx. This is my individual poll route. And I'm just going to, this is a simple one, sure. Paste this over and say, okay, this is the, just for, not actually for functionality, just for clarity, this is the poll ID route. And I'm going to say poll specific in here. And I don't know what I did here, but I'll save it. Hopefully I didn't break it. Come back to here and say, okay, RVNUG. Okay, cool. I didn't get that 404 anymore, but I didn't, nothing changed. Interesting. Well, it's because even though my route 453 matches a valid route, preventing a 404 error to be thrown, I actually have a parent route that is not saying where any children should be rendered. So the thing that everyone's used to in React Router and most of the other browser routers out there is the concept of an outlet. So this is now saying, okay, this is my polls route, but any routes nested inside of this, I want to display right here. And so now I can come down here and say, oh, here's my poll specific stuff. And if I delete the 543, I don't have poll specific stuff at the bottom, and that's cool. But I don't want to show the list of polls when I'm on a poll. So it really shouldn't have it in my parent route. This is a situation where your polls route has a variable child route, but then it also has a leaf node. It also has a top level node. Like, what if I'm at polls/nothing? And the way you specify that is by, paste this in, is by specifying another index inside of that folder. And so there are ways to get around not doing as many index.tsx files, but for the sake of this conversation, basically we can just have our polls, welcome, pick a poll. And at this point, my route, my polls route, not the children route, but the top level polls, isn't actually leveraging any loader data. So I'm going to move all of this into that child route. So that way, when I'm on an individual poll, you know, I don't have to like, I already have it in here. Cool. Okay. I don't need my links function. I don't need my meta function. I don't need the outlet. And I just have this. My polls doesn't have a loader function anymore. Make it clear. Okay. And then my poll ID is still really simple, but we come back here, it says, hey, this is really, really wrong. You did something terrible. You likely forgot to export your component from the file it's defined in. Okay, so we come back here. What did I just do wrong?
Or like appreciate error messages that suggest what you might have done wrong.
Yes, the DX around the error messaging and when you make a catastrophic error, it's not so bad. And then also, I won't get into it in this talk, but the error handling and error boundaries and catch boundaries, very cool, because you can have caught, like if you have that nested routing and one of your nested routes throws an error, you can be very specific with how that gets handled and how it affects the rest of the user experience. All right, so poll specific stuff, polls. So all that I needed to do, I think, was a hard refresh. So to get rid of that error, because we had done all the exports correctly, or maybe I didn't save a file. But let's look at what we just changed. I'm going to focus on this. So we have our top level route, our index route in our app folder, in the routes folder inside of that. So that says go to polls. We have a polls route, but our polls route has a header that we want to be consistent and then an outlet. And that's really it. We update the meta and we add some styling. And this is going to say basically this file and anything inside of this folder is going to have this applied, this style sheet URL applied. And so this is where you can be mindful about importing those specific CSS as you even get into the nested routes. And so we have this top level route that has an outlet. We have a leaf node a leaf route that says, hey, welcome, pick a poll, hits Firebase, gets the polls, uses the loader data, renders the polls. And then we have a poll ID variable here. And I can grab, I can render the path parameter here. I think it's like, use params, I think is what it is. And then you say poll ID. It's 543 6CW. We can grab the parameter from $poll ID is a variable we can leverage, and we are going to leverage that because we are going to leverage a loader function in this as well. So our loader function here is going to be an asynchronous function like the last one. It is going to, it takes in some params. I think I don't need to specify this typing anymore. I think it's implicit, but whatever. It returns get poll, the result from get poll. So in our loader function, we say, all right, what's the parameter, our route parameter that we have? And this is going to be, the same kind of logic you have in any API that has a route path parameter or a path parameter. You need to use the parameter. You need to hit some data retrieval, and then you need to give that data retrieval to the front end. It's just a lot of times this is in a whole separate code base called API or backend for front end or whatever, and not in the same file that you're going to be using it. So for us to use it, I'm just going to copy this template across because running low on time. We're going to say, okay, we want to go ahead and use the loader data here. What we're going to do is build up this options JSX. So actually, I iterate through the poll data options, and just I want to have a button. So a button with a key and a value, and then I want to render it all within a HTML form. So here's my poll options JSX. So let's look at what the front end is supposed to look like. We've got our wrapping div. Everybody loves divs. We've got an H1 that's going to be the form title. We have a span that should be the question of the form. Then we have a capital F form, but this really just renders a lowercase f form, HTML form that we are used to, but with some additional things like I don't need to specify that the action of this is polls slash something like this, where I have like my poll ID. I don't need to do this because when I'm using the capital F form, if I don't provide an action, it's assumed that the action is the current route. So that's some of the stuff that it's giving you. But when you look at the front end, you're looking at really just a form. So here's that action slash polls slash 6WTW div poll options. These are buttons, just normal buttons. So again, I'm not importing some UI library that has a form or anything. This is, why are you here? Form, button, button, button. And the way that we do something with this, so if I click it now, it's going to be like, you can't, you made a post request, but did not provide an action for route polls. Talk about descriptive error messages. So there's no way to handle the request. Okay, let's jump into the next aspect. After loaders in Remix, we have something called actions. Actions are also, this is also going to be an async function. And this is going to take request and params, and it is going to be an arrow function where we say, okay, ultimately, I know that I want to run a function called vote on poll, because that's what I want to do, right? I want to vote on this poll. And then at the end of it, I want to redirect the user to a cool page called polls slash, and I'm sure there's a way that I should be doing this. Maybe let's just try actually doing this using relative routing. I'm not exactly sure that'll work, but we'll see. Our vote on poll function takes a poll ID and an option ID. So how are we going to get that? How are we going to get a poll ID and an option ID? Well, our option ID should come from our button in our form. Yeah, because we have a value with our option key, which must be our option ID. So that'll be easy. And then our form ID, well, we have that in the params, similar to how we have it in the params up here, because it's a path parameter. So we'll say form data is going to be, let's await the request dot form data. And option ID is going to be, well, it's going to be form data dot get. And then what do we call it? Name option. Okay, cool. Then our poll ID is going to be params.poll ID. And then to vote on the poll, we're going to specify these two named parameters that they want, which are poll and option ID. And then we're going to try redirecting here. Let's see if, let's do it in a way that I'm pretty sure works first. So redirect the polls, poll ID voted. And we don't have a voted file yet. So let me just make that. I'll do this first. So let's see what happens. Okay. All right. It looks like something happened. Took me to voted, so it probably worked. Let's double check that real quick. Want to learn about remix is vote 4. Want to learn about remix is now vote 5. Great. Okay. It took me to a page that doesn't exist. So I wanted to have a nested page after 543. So just like with the other one, I will make a poll ID / voted.tsx and paste in my voted function, which is going to show me the values of all of the options. And because I made this $poll ID function similar with the $, or with the polls, though this will no longer throw 404, I don't have an outlet in here that's going to show me the values. I could render them beneath that here. So I could say, okay, I want to have this div with this form, and then I want to have my outlet after that. So this would work. Here it is. So if I go to 543, I'll zoom out a little bit. I've reloaded these options because I don't have them alphabetically sorted or anything. But you can see, okay, this is subrouting, but I actually want it to be only showing one of these things at a time. Like after you vote, I don't want you to be able to vote again and do that refresh and all that stuff. So I'm going to change this, move it in here, and rename this to index so that we have the same principle where you have a leaf node and then like a variable route underneath, and remove the outlet. And now we have, I think, most everything in place. So RVNUG, learn about any tech. So boom, voted route, showing all the data in here. Let's go to the action once more. We're almost done, so bear with me for a few more minutes. The action function. All right, I said, there's not a bunch of bogus extra libraries, guys. It's super cool. And then you're like, well, what the heck is all this stuff? Request form data and then form data.get. Where is this defined? And this is one of the really fun things about Remix is that when you are looking up what's the way to use URL search parameters, what's the way to use form data, it is in the Mozilla Developer Network web docs. It is in the most user-friendly, developer-friendly documentation source that you can have for front end because it is the core platform. So this is another example of embracing the web as a platform and not trying to over abstract technology that has gotten pretty good. Our form data technology and our front end forms have gotten pretty good. So, and then the other piece of this that I'm not sure we remember, but you all see any JavaScript happening here? 543 has all this stuff. I still don't have, if I look at my elements, go to the head, there's no JavaScript being brought into this application, except for, well, I guess I never got rid of it from the root. So let's do that so that it's a better demonstration instead of me lying. Well, there it is. I guess this is because I have the dev tools on. But you can see in the network calls, nothing's coming from our JavaScript. That's just because it's the live reload stuff. So I think if I can this npm run build, and then yeah, so now the only script is coming from this. This is one of my extensions. So no scripts no React being brought into this application. No JavaScript in here at all. Yet we still have this form. And what's more is, anybody cares about accessibility? No, you should. This is no JavaScript. This is me hitting the tab key, me hitting the enter key in the way that a accessibility or accessible technology user would expect. So I'm used to fixing Angular, Vue, and React apps and adding a lot of accessibility code to accommodate for different UI component libraries that introduce accessibility problems. So I am very familiar. I gave a talk in November at a conference about custom accessibility solutions, modal trapping, and focus trapping, and focus redirection, and forms are like one of the biggest things because that's most of web apps is forms. This is out of the box, even though you're building with React, even though you're using JSX, even though you're using your data loaders and mapping across data options, this is accessible fully out of the box without anything extra you have to do. And that is huge for me and my perspective. That saves a lot of time, and it brings up the baseline experience for everybody. So yeah.
You know, the accessibility, I mean, there is definitely benefit to those who need it, but for me, it's actually a fantastic way to use your keyboard. And I'm a big keyboard user, especially if it's a site that I'm going to use a lot. I'd much rather learn the keystrokes to get the work done than fiddle with the mouse. So if it's a site I'm going to use a lot, I'm going to, if it's available, find out what the keystrokes are. And making it accessible allows you to also use the site with your keyboard, which I think is fantastic.
Yeah, and I think that is a very much resonates with this other set of slides I have. Accessible design is good design. You eliminate frustrating user experiences for everybody when you eliminate it for one user group, and that's a great example of you use a website, you're used to using your keyboard, you get somewhere, and it's like, why can't I tab through this? That's a frustrating user experience. So make it accessible, make it better for everybody. We added child routes, we added styling, we moved it around, we added a list of polls using loader functions, connecting to Firebase, grabbing real data across the cloud with less than 60 lines of code for that Firebase interface file. We have actions that show natively accessible using core platform technologies like the many years dependent form and added voting in doing so. That's the coding. I recommend everybody tries it out. We went through that in an hour and some change. You can do the same and likely a heck of a lot more in the same amount of time. So I have the slides available, and please email me if you want them. I can send out the link to them right now in this chat. But outside of that, please look at the docs. There are people way smarter than me who have written some really good stuff on how you can get things like type safety across the wire, using things like Prisma and automatically having ORM type safety, how to do progressive enhancements, all that sort of stuff. Yeah, Thank you. Any questions? I saw Josh, you raised your hand there, but if you or anybody else has any questions, I can go ahead and field them.
I'm sorry, I misclicked when I tried to do the applause.
Oh, that's fine. Yeah, I'm going to send the link out to these slides in here in case anybody wants to check them out.
Special notes for deployment, like anything different that you would want to do for this than like any React app or Angular app, or like anything that would be different?
Yes, there are some things that are different. Like you can't just pop it in an S3 bucket. So it's different than a normal React app, but not that different than the way a lot of people host React apps by putting it behind an Express server or something like that. In the end, there are, like if you go to one of the main things in like fly.io is run a Remix application. A lot of these providers now. So this is run on Netlify, and I'll show you the deployment for it. I didn't write any of this. It just came with the template that I use. So you have a Netlify toml, and you have a, outside of the Netlify toml, I think you just have a server.js file that handles some of the stuff that is helpful for like edge routing and all of that. But I also, our other application is not using Netlify, and it is, one second, I'll show you the hosting for that. That is using, you'll see no Netlify, but we have a Docker file that just specifies, hey, base node 16, run build, run start. So any Docker solution, this gets run on Google Cloud Run, Google Cloud Platform's Cloud Run product. But really, really easy to get it deployed somewhere, basically. You can see this Remix poll. Took like 5 seconds to get this set up in Netlify because I just did it based on the main thing, and this auto deploys from Bitbucket and all that good stuff. So it's easy to host using legacy or very recent / modern like edge providers and stuff like that. But you don't need to go with something over the top sexy. You can just have a basic web server that it's running on like any other kind of server.
Great. That makes it nice. I like that Docker.
Yeah. There's a Docker solution that makes it pretty easy.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Nick. Really appreciate you coming in and showing us Remix. I think this was a fantastic presentation. Definitely makes your life easier in many aspects, and definitely worth looking into. So really appreciate you showing this to us.